It's Ash from Super Videos, back for another video for Season 7 of Fear the Walking Dead. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at whether Strand was a terrible villain or is a terrible villain because he's still a villain, and whether his villain storyline was forced or rushed, whatever word you want to use. The short answer is, in my opinion, he was a terrible villain and his storyline was rushed. Now what makes it even worse is that he was just a Negan copycat. So stay tuned, we'll be right back to break it all down. Alright, as always, before we jump into this, smash that like button, subscribe to join our community, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. With that, let's get right into it. So the Strand villain story really started in Season 7, Episode 1. To be completely honest, in the first half of Season 7, I felt like they did the Strand villain story well, and his story didn't feel forced, at least not as much as it does now. And I felt like they were slowly building him up to become a villain, or a bigger villain, but as his villain story progressed, it seemed more and more apparent that they were forcing and rushing his villain storyline. And they had essentially turned Strand into a ruthless, brutal killer, but without doing the proper story to build him up to become this ruthless, brutal killer. And it definitely felt more and more as his story progressed that he was just a Negan ripoff. His villain storyline was a copy of the Negan and the Saviors storyline, with the only big difference being that Negan was a villain when we saw him, but Strand was a quote-unquote good guy and then turned into a villain. What led to Negan becoming a villain was years and years of things that forced him into that position. And he didn't just become a brutal, ruthless killer in a few months. It took years and years of the apocalyptic world turning him into a villain. But when it comes to Strand, they didn't really do that. Although they could have, they didn't really make Strand have these brutal, ruthless tendencies until much later. And they essentially had him go from 0 to 100 real quick, and had him become this ruthless, brutal killer in a few months. What took Negan's character a few years. So it definitely felt like it was a forced way to make Strand be a villain. And they didn't do the proper build-up to make it realistic and genuine and something that the audience can buy. The other thing that I feel like helped the situation earlier on in the Strand villain story was that it wasn't like Strand was this brutal, ruthless killer right away, although he did kill some people at the beginning as well. It really felt like it was a difference of ideology and a difference of perspective, and they did a relatively good job making it seem realistic for Strand to be doing what he was doing. Like, it was easier for the audience to buy into it and see his perspective. But as the time went on, that became less and less realistic and more forced. Now what's interesting and what makes this even worse is that this is not the first time they've made someone from Fear look like Negan. They also did that with Virginia. They essentially had Virginia and her Rangers be a copycat of the Negan and the Saviors, even giving Virginia her own lineup scene in Season 6, much like the Negan lineup scene, and marketing that particular scene as being a Virginia lineup scene. So by making Strand be a villain and having his story be extremely similar to the Negan story was not only bad because it was a Negan copy story, but it was bad because it was a recycle of stories that they've already done on Fear. So they did a recycle of a copy story that they already did. Now when it comes to the lineup, obviously Negan had one, which was the one that made the most sense. It was the one that was the original story, and then Virginia had it, and also Strand had it as well. What we saw with Strand at the tower throwing people off was essentially a lineup, or it had the same outcome as a lineup. The only thing missing was he wasn't picking and choosing people necessarily, and there wasn't an actual lineup involved. But essentially it had the same outcome and the same story effect. Now the other thing that makes the Strand villain story even more underwhelming and unrealistic is that they kept going back and forth in what they wanted his story to truly be. There were times when they made the Strand villain story feel like it was a war between Morgan's ideologies and Strand's ideologies, and they made it seem like these two characters were the faces of these two groups going to war. But then at other times they made it seem like this was with Alicia. Of course, from Strand's perspective, they explained it by having it be really about him trying to win her over. But from Alicia's perspective, she was going to war with Strand. So it definitely felt like a Civil War type of story, where it was Alicia going against Strand. Just like at times, it felt like they were doing essentially the same thing, but with Morgan. But then at other times, they made it seem like they're gonna go a slightly different route, with having someone on the inside be the one that go against Strand and be the one that kill him. They did that obviously with John Dory Sr. He even said it himself. He wants to win Strand over and work on the inside to end the Strand reign. But then at other times, they made it seem like they're doing that, but with Howard, and having a storyline where Howard is trying to take over, like he's power hungry and he's trying to take over. But what they essentially ended up doing is, instead of having the more natural story with Howard and Strand, they had John Dory Sr. be the one that kills Howard, which was yet another forced story on its own. And they made the twist of the story be that John Dory Sr. is the one that kills Howard, even though it was unrealistic and didn't seem like there was enough build-up for it. And it definitely fell out of the blue. Now you may ask, why did they do that? Why did they give it to John Dory Sr. instead of Strand? The answer is simple, and it goes back to how Strand's story was a copy of the Negan story. They didn't want to do that and have Strand kill his right-hand man Howard because they already did that. If it sounds familiar, it's because it is. It's what they did with Negan and Simon. They had Negan kill his right-hand man Simon. So to stay away from that, to not make the story 100% the same thing, they didn't have Strand kill his right-hand man Howard. But what makes this even worse is that it felt like the writers had a change of heart, and that they all of a sudden looked at it and were like, we really like this idea of a big bad killing their right-hand man. Brought Wes in, forced him to become the second villain of the story, and forced his story such that he's Strand's right-hand man, just to have Strand kill him, and have the Strand kills his right-hand man story, just like the Negan and Simon one. So that was another added layer that made it even more annoying. I think all of the fans realized how similar the Strand story was to the Negan story, so the writers came up with this clumsy way to not have Strand and Howard fight each other like Negan and Simon, and add a unrealistic twist and have Wes enter the story and have it be between Wes and Strand instead. But to be quite honest, I think we all realized, or at least I did. So when it comes to the Strand story, it was definitely a copy of the Negan story. So to have a bit of damage control, they compromised and sacrificed John Dory Sr. Remember, John Dory Sr. entered the story as being the replacement for John. And it was the writer's way of having fans not be mad that John is gone, or at least, again, damage control for John's death. But they essentially ruined John Dory Sr.'s character, and not only his character, but John's story in a way, by having John Dory Sr. have this unrealistic forced story with Howard and then die afterwards in a very generic, cliche, and underwhelming way. Just so that fans don't immediately realize how much of a similar story the Strand being a villain story was to the Negan being a villain story. But overall, I feel like the Strand villain story was rushed and forced. Strand was a terrible villain. One of the main reasons for that was because the Negan and the Savior's storyline was essentially copied and recycled for Strand without any real original story added in or any clever way to make it not feel quite the same thing. But I'm definitely interested to know everyone's thoughts and opinions about this. Do you think Strand was a terrible villain? Do you think that his villain storyline was rushed? And also, do you think that it was essentially a copy of the Negan and the Savior's storyline? So share your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button, subscribe to join our community, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.